Okay, so we're back and ready to, we'll dive in.
Yeah, sounds good. Always ready to dive in.
This time we're looking at the OpenID Foundation workshop
Mm-hmm.
that just, wrapped up yesterday, actually,
Fresh from the oven.
out at Google in California.
The heart of, the tech world, Silicon Valley.
So much happening in digital identity, we figured, why wait? Let's get this information out there, right?
Absolutely. People are busy, right? They want the highlights, the need-to-know stuff.
Yeah.
We're going to sift through this recap and give them exactly that.
No need to wade through pages of technical jargon. We'll do that for you.
We'll break it down, make it clear what's important, what's changing the game, that kind of thing.
And the official stuff, the presentations and all that, that'll be out there soon.
Yeah, recordings, slides, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
But that takes time,
Exactly. Consider this your cheat sheet.
Fast track to the key takeaways.
Why should you care? That's
Yeah.
what we'll focus on.
Sounds like a plan.
So let's jump right in, shall we?
Let's do it. EKYC and identity assurance. Oh yeah, EKYC, the electronic Know Your Customer. Seeing a lot of movement there globally. It's exciting to see these standards becoming reality.
Like a real-world implementation.
Exactly. OpenID Connect Authority 1.0, for instance. Picking up steam in Australia, the UK. It's spreading.
So for those of us who, aren't deep in the weeds of this stuff, what does that actually mean?
It means that the way you prove who you are online, right, it's becoming more standardized.
Streamlined, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Less hassle when you're dealing with different services, even cross countries.
Makes sense. And speaking of standards picking up speed, what about FAPI? I saw that it was submitted to ISO. That's a pretty big deal, right?
It is. The International Organization for Standardization, that's a global stamp of approval. When a standard like FAPI, crucial for online financial stuff, gets that kind of recognition, well, it's a big confidence booster.
Especially for things like banking, right? Where security is, paramount.
Exactly. And it's nearing the end of its voting period, so that seal of approval could be coming very soon.
So more secure, more reliable online transactions on the horizon.
Precisely. More trust, wider adoption.
Okay. And there was also mention of this working group meeting coming up in Tokyo, focused on identity assurance, right? And the conformance testing suite being out of beta. What does that tell us?
Well, it's a sign of maturity. These standards are solidifying. When the testing suite is out of beta, it means it's stable, ready for prime time. Developers can be confident that things are working as they should, that systems can talk to each other. And that Tokyo meeting, well, that's all about refining how we ensure someone online is really who they say they are.
More and more important these days, right? With, everything moving online.
Absolutely. And they're looking at new applications, too. Age verification, for example, or proving someone's authority to act on behalf of an organization. And there's the final version of attachments coming in Q2, adding even more capabilities to these core standards. It's a lot of moving pieces, but it's all moving in the right direction.
So a solid foundation, and they're just building on it.
That's a great way to put it.
All right, let's shift gears a bit here. DAE, Death and Digital Estate.
Ah, yes, DAE. A fascinating and perhaps a slightly unsettling topic for some.
Yeah, I'll admit it's not something I think about all that often.
Well, it's becoming increasingly important as our lives become more and more digital. Our online footprint, our writing, photos, videos, code even. It's all a form of digital property, a digital estate.
A digital legacy, in a way.
Exactly. And the DAE community group, formed back in September, they're wrestling with some big questions. How do we manage these assets when someone dies or becomes incapacitated?
It's a lot to think about, all that digital stuff we accumulate. And they're looking at scenarios for both temporary or permanent disablement.
As well as death, of course.
Right.
One of the biggest challenges they've identified is the lack of consistency across online platforms. When it comes to legacy contacts, who you designate to manage your accounts if you're gone, it's a bit of a wild west out there.
So each service has its own approach, or maybe no approach at all.
In some cases, yeah. That creates a huge burden on individuals and families. You're already dealing with a difficult situation, and then you have to navigate this patchwork system. It's a real mess.
It's not something most platforms have really prioritized in a uniform way, have they?
Not really.
Makes sense. So what's the plan? I know they're working on a white paper, and they've got that panel at Identiverse coming up.
Right. The white paper, it's called The State of Digital Estate Management. It's going to include a practical guide, steps you can take to plan for your digital legacy. And they're aiming to release it during Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which makes a lot of sense.
Connect it to that broader theme of digital responsibility, right?
Exactly. And the panel at Identiverse, that'll be a great opportunity to really dig into these issues, bring together experts and stakeholders.
And it sounds like they're thinking globally, but also recognizing that different regions might need different approaches.
Yes, absolutely. A universal framework would be great, but they realize legal and cultural differences might require some tailoring. And they're even looking at MOSIP as a potential model, the modular open source identity platform.
What's that all about?
Well, it's active in countries like India, and it provides a framework for digital identity that's, well, modular and adaptable.
So they're hoping to learn from that and apply those lessons to digital estate management.
Exactly.
Interesting. So from our digital afterlife, let's move on to something a bit more, well, present, artificial intelligence.
Right, AI, always a hot topic.
And a bit of a controversial one, maybe.
A little bit. The workshop had a panel discussion on AI authentication, and it definitely sparked some debate.
What was the trigger for that?
Well, it started with this discovery of AI chatbots trying to connect to APIs, those pathways that software systems use to communicate. And they were trying to take actions without any proper authentication, proving they had permission. A little bit alarming, to be honest.
Wow. So basically these AI bots are trying to do things without asking.
Pretty much. And that raises a whole bunch of red flags about security and control.
Sounds like the AI folks are realizing they can't just reinvent the wheel when it comes to security.
That's one way to put it. There was a lot of emphasis on how well-established principles from OAuth, that's a standard way for applications to get access to user accounts and existing API security patterns, can be applied to AI. No need to start from scratch.
I see. So leverage what we already know works, adapt it to the AI world.
Exactly. And Aaron Parecki, he had this blog post about the Model Context Protocol, MCP. He argued that existing OAuth concepts could solve a lot of these AI authentication issues right out of the gate. It's a really interesting perspective.
I remember that. But I mean, was everyone on board with that? There was Tobin's point about, well, how much authority we should be giving to AI agents. That seemed like a bit of a dividing line, right?
Oh, yeah. Definitely differing opinions on that. Some folks were saying, look, users just want the AI to get things done quickly. Too much authentication just gets in the way. Others were like, hold on, we need strict controls. Human oversight is essential. We can't just let AI run wild. It's a complex issue for sure.
Yeah. No easy answers there. And then George Fletcher brought up some really important points about responsibility and consent, especially when AI is involved.
Those are absolutely crucial considerations. As AI gets more powerful, more autonomous, the question of liability becomes huge. Who's to blame if something goes wrong? And how do we even get meaningful consent from users when AI is making decisions? Imagine an AI using your credit card. Defining what it can and can't do, that gets really complicated really fast. It's not just a simple yes or no anymore.
Definitely not your average online shopping situation.
Not at all.
It sounds like the very nature of AI, the fact that it can learn and act in unpredictable ways, makes this a whole different ballgame.
Oh, absolutely. Traditional authentication models, they were designed for humans with predictable patterns of behavior. AI throws a wrench in that whole system. We have to figure out how to delegate authority effectively, how to make sure users understand what they're agreeing to, and how to build systems that can handle these more dynamic situations. It's a challenge, but it's an exciting one.
So where does the OpenID Foundation fit into all of this? They're not just sitting on the sidelines, are they?
No, they're definitely taking a proactive approach. They see the urgency here. And they're planning to create a white paper specifically for the AI community. Draw on their expertise in open banking and digital identity to help guide the development of secure, interoperable AI systems. The goal is to learn from the past, avoid repeating mistakes, and build a solid foundation for AI authentication from the get-go. It's smart, really.
Yeah, instead of playing catch-up later. Okay, let's move on to the OpenID Connect working group. Sounds like they had a bit of a scare with OpenID Federation.
A bit of a scare, yeah. A security analysis revealed a pretty significant vulnerability. Not good.
Not good at all. Tell me more.
Well, researchers at the University of Stuttgart, they were looking at OpenID Federation, and they found a weakness in how authorization servers were handling audience values, who a digital token is meant for.
So potentially the wrong party could get their hands on sensitive information.
That's the gist of it.
But it sounds like they caught it before any real damage was done.
That's the good news. It was handled responsibly, disclosed privately to those affected. And they quickly developed fixes, got them implemented. So a bit of a close call, but a good reminder that ongoing security analysis is absolutely essential.
And they didn't just patch OpenID Federation itself, right?
Right. Because these protocols are all interconnected, the fixes had to be applied across the board. OpenID Connect Core, FAPI 1 and 2, CIBA Core, all had to be updated. It's all under what they're calling Draft 7523 TBs. It just goes to show how important it is to have this community approach to security.
Everyone working together to keep the whole system safe.
Exactly. And beyond that, the working group, they're developing certification tests for OpenID Federation, planning an interoperability event in Sweden later this month, and they've adopted a bunch of new specifications. Busy folks, for sure.
Sounds like it. One of those new specifications was OpenID provider commands, right? Dick Hardy did a presentation on that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one. It's all about simplifying how an identity provider, the system that manages your logins, communicates with the applications you use.
Streamlining things, basically.
Yeah. Instead of using complex protocols like SCIM, the identity provider can just send signed messages, called JWT commands, directly to the app. Manage your account lifecycle, activate it, suspend it, even delete it.
So it's like a direct line of communication between your identity manager and the app.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
And for those longer commands that might take some time to process, they're using server-sent events, real-time updates. The whole goal is to make things easier, more efficient, and potentially even more secure.
Sounds good. I saw there was some discussion about renaming the command URI and maybe some other tweaks based on early feedback.
Yep. They're talking about calling it the command endpoint instead, which might be a bit clearer. And they're also looking at improving error reporting, making it easier to troubleshoot any problems.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move on to the Often Working Group. Authorization. They're tackling the tricky question of, well, who gets to do what online?
Right. Digital permissions, basically. It's a fundamental part of security and privacy. They're working on standardizing how different systems make those decisions. Who can access what, under what conditions.
So, like, when you try to open a file on your computer, your operating system checks if you have the right permissions.
Exactly. It's like that, but for the online world. And they're creating this common language for the policy enforcement point. The gatekeeper, basically, and the policy decision point, the brain that makes the final call. The goal is to ensure consistency and security across different online services.
And they've already got some drafts out there for these standards.
You do. They've got an evaluation API for checking permissions for a single action, a bash API for checking multiple actions at once, and a search API for finding relevant policies.
Seems pretty comprehensive. And are they actually, testing this stuff out, making sure it works in the real world?
Oh, yeah. They're all about the real-world testing.
Yeah.
They've been doing interoperability testing, and they've seen a huge increase in participation since December. That tells you there's real interest in these standards. They're testing with API gateways for broader permissions checks, what they call medium-grained authorization, and with a simple to-do app for very specific permissions checks, fine-grained authorization.
So they're covering all the bases.
They are. And the fact that they've got 17 different policy decision point vendors involved, plus a bunch of major API gateway providers, it shows you that the industry is serious about making this work.
Good to see that kind of collaboration. What's next for the Often Working Group?
Well, they want to stabilize the evaluation and batch APIs, get those solidified based on the testing feedback. They're also working on a second draft that'll include the search API and other refinements. The goal is to have Authn 1.0 finalized by late summer or early fall. And looking further out, they want to formalize that API gateway profile and maybe even develop a profile specifically for identity providers.
Sounds ambitious.
It is, but they're on a roll. And what's really encouraging is that we're already seeing companies implementing these Authn standards, Topaz, Zuplo, Amazon, with their feeder project. It's becoming real.
That's what you want to see, right? Real-world adoption.
Absolutely. Okay, let's talk about IPSIE. That stands for Interoperability Profiles for Secure Identity in the Enterprise. A mouthful, I know, but important stuff.
Yeah, enterprise identity, that can be a real headache.
Can be. So many standards, so many options. It can be a real mess. And that's where IPSIE comes in. They're all about defining specific, well-defined ways of using existing standards. These profiles reduce the complexity, make it easier for different systems within an organization or even between organizations to work together securely.
So less chaos, more consistency, more security.
Yeah.
And they're using this level-based approach, focusing on session lifecycle and identity lifecycle.
Right. So you've got session lifecycle. That's all about how you log in and stay logged in. And then there's identity lifecycle, which covers how your digital identity is created, managed, and eventually removed within an organization. And within each of those, they've got 3 levels, from basic to advanced. It's a roadmap for enterprises to gradually improve their identity management practices.
Makes sense. So start with the basics and work your way up, and they've already got some profiles drafted.
Yep. They've proposed a profile based on OpenID Connect for the first level of session lifecycle, SL1. And they've even got a draft showing how SAML could be used to achieve the same goals. They're also working on the first level for identity lifecycle, IL1, which will probably focus on user provisioning, how new accounts are created.
So step by step, building a more secure and interoperable enterprise identity ecosystem.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
And they're planning to test it all out at the Gartner IAM conference in December, an SL1 interoperability event.
Putting it to the test.
Exactly.
All right, next up is the shared signals framework. Sounds interesting.
It is. It's all about enabling different online services to share security information with each other, almost in real time.
So if one service detects a problem, they can warn others.
That's the basic idea. It could be something like a compromised account or a suspicious change to a user's profile.
Like a heads up.
Yeah, a heads up. But it's more than just simple alerts. The services can actually agree on what types of information they want to share, like risk scores or session details.
So it's not just, hey, this account might be compromised. It's more detailed than that.
Much more detailed. And there are specific rules called application profiles for different types of information, like for sharing risk information, or for a project called KB. And there's a draft for something called skim events for communicating changes to user accounts.
So potentially a problem on one platform could help protect your accounts on others.
Exactly.
Sounds pretty powerful.
It is. And it's all designed to be very secure and efficient. The receiving service initiates the communication, specifying what it's interested in. And the event information is sent using a standardized format called Security Event Tokens, or SETs.
Technical stuff, but it sounds like it works.
It does. The core specification, along with the KP and risk profiles, they're almost finalized. And they've been doing extensive interoperability testing in Texas and London. Those tests have gotten more and more rigorous. In London, for example, they required participating systems to pass conformance tests beforehand.
So they're really raising the bar.
Yeah. And what's really exciting is that major companies are already supporting shared signals, Apple, Okta, Signal, Jamf. We're seeing beta programs, plans for wider deployment. It's happening. And the OpenID Foundation, they're working on a white paper specifically for the financial services industry, and they're even talking to the Aspen Institute about using shared signals to combat fraud.
Impressive. Okay, let's move on to Madorna.
Mobile operator stuff.
Yeah.
CIBA client-initiated back-channel authentication.
Right. CIBA Core has reached final version. That's a big milestone.
It is. A lot of work went into that.
So what's next? What's the Madorna working group focused on now?
Well, they're working on finalizing the discovery profile and the Madorna CIBA profile, which are specific ways of using CIBA in mobile contexts. And they're also working on any corrections or clarifications for the core CIBA spec. They call it errata. But a big part of their work right now is outreach, collaborating with the mobile industry, GSMA, ETSI, the Camel project. They want to get everyone on board.
Get the mobile world speaking the same language.
Exactly. And their goal is to finalize an agreement with the GSMA, the Global Association of Mobile Network Operators, by the end of the year.
Smart move. Most people are accessing the internet through their phones these days.
Absolutely. Mobile's where it's at. And this could lead to some really cool stuff, more secure, more convenient ways of logging into things using your phone.
Sounds good to me. Okay, shifting gears again, we've got the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. What's the OpenID Foundation doing there?
The ITU, it's a UN standardization body. And for some governments, having specs endorsed by a UN body, well, it's a big deal. It might even be a requirement. So the OpenID Foundation, they want to broaden the reach of their specifications, especially in regions where those UN-backed standards are important. It's all about global adoption.
Makes sense. But I thought they were already working with ISO.
They are. But ISO and the ITU, they have different approaches. ISO does adoption by reference. They basically just republish the spec under their own brand. The ITU, they usually do adoption by implementation. So the OpenID specs need to be converted, reformatted to fit the ITU style.
A bit more work involved.
Yeah. So as a test case, they converted the OpenID Connect core spec to the ITU format, submitted it for review. They're expecting feedback any day now.
So dipping their toes in the water, seeing how it goes.
Exactly. If it works out, they might submit other specs too.
Makes sense. All right, we're in the home stretch here. Let's talk about City Hub, the global multi-stakeholder community for digital identity interoperability. Quite a mouthful.
It is. But it's a really important initiative, bringing together folks from over 25 countries, plus organizations like the OECD and the World Bank. It's all about figuring out how to make digital identity systems work across borders.
No small feat.
No, it's a huge undertaking. They've held 5 summits already all over the world. The most recent one was in Tokyo. The next one's in Addis Ababa in May. That one's going to focus on digital identity in Africa.
So, a truly global effort. What are their guiding principles?
Well, they're all about solutions that are human-centric, putting individuals first. They also respect national sovereignty, each country's right to control its own identity systems. And they're big on multilateral engagement, international cooperation. They want to see digital identity used to solve real-world problems. And they recognize that both technology and policy are crucial.
A holistic approach, it sounds like.
Yeah, they're not just focused on the technical side.
And they've published a bunch of reports, haven't they?
9 in 2024 alone. Summaries of their summits, deep dives into 3 champion use cases. They're looking at how digital ID can help refugees, improve access to education and credentials, and make opening bank accounts easier. They've also got reports on governance and their strategic goals.
Busy bees. So what's on their plate now? I saw something about a digital commons.
Right, that's their current focus. It's not a piece of software, but a shared set of guidelines, tools, and resources, all designed to help with global interoperability. They've got 2 main work streams. One focused on trust management, looking at things like OpenID Federation. The other is diving into how to bridge different cross-border identity ecosystems, taking into account things like the Financial Action Task Force recommendations and the EU's upcoming attestation rulebook.
Lots of moving pieces.
There are. But it's all moving towards a more connected, more trustworthy digital world.
Okay, let's circle back to FAPI. The FAPI2 security profile and attacker model, those are finally published, right?
Yep, big milestone. It's a robust blueprint for securing APIs, especially in finance. A lot of work went into that. And for anyone who's doing financial stuff online, this just makes things safer.
And those conformance tests to make sure everyone's implementing FAPI2 correctly, those are coming along too.
Right. The beta release is this month, so developers can start really putting their implementations through their paces.
Excellent. And we're seeing FAPI gaining traction in various ecosystems too, right?
Yeah, it's popping up everywhere. The Bank for International Settlements, the UK's selected program, even Chile and Colombia are looking at it for their grant management systems. The Australian government's involved. FDX is moving to FAPI2. It's becoming the gold standard.
Impressive. Were there any major changes in this final version of FAPI2 compared to the earlier drafts?
The biggest change was in how they handle the audience value in private key JWT client authentication. It's a technical detail, but it's important for security.
Got it.
But most developers, if they've been following the drafts, the transition should be pretty smooth. And going forward, the FAPI working group, they want to finalize the FAPI2 message signing spec, add even more security, and they're creating detailed implementation guides to help developers get it right. Plus, they're working on a shared signals white paper specifically for financial services in regions like Chile and Brazil.
Okay, almost there. Digital Credentials Protocol, DCP, lots of new stuff happening there, right?
Yeah, lots of activity. They've released updated drafts for OpenID for verifiable presentations. That's about how you present digital credentials. Think of it like, showing your digital driver's license. The updates include better ways to query for information within a credential, support for transaction details, a new secure data format called SDJWT, support for X.509 certificates, changes to how applications identify themselves, and even stuff related to how browsers can handle credentials.
So refining the whole presentation process. And what about issuing those credentials? OpenID for verifiable credential issuance, VCI.
Right. They got a second draft out for VCI. They've added a nonce endpoint to prevent certain types of attacks. And they've added support for issuing the same credential to multiple people in a way that protects privacy. They've also simplified things by removing the batch endpoint.
Okay. And what about that HYPE profile, high assurance interoperability?
That's for high security use cases. The first draft mandates the use of that more expressive query language we talked about earlier, and it includes a profile for presenting mobile driver's licenses, MDOC, over a standard browser API. They're also coordinating with the international standard for mobile driver's licenses.
So making sure everything aligns.
Exactly.
So lots of technical progress. What's the DCP working group focusing on right now?
Well, they want to completely ditch the old way of presenting credentials and fully embrace that new query language. They're also working on better ways to support trusted authorities, those organizations that vouch for the validity of credentials. And they're tackling the complexities of multi-RP authentication, when you need to authenticate with multiple services. Plus, they're developing tests to make sure implementations are correct. And they're working closely with the European Commission to ensure that these OpenID specifications are referenced in EU regulations, which could be a huge driver of adoption.
Big implications for Europe and maybe beyond.
Potentially. Okay, last but not least, we've got the NIST interoperability testing.
NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they were looking at mobile driver's licenses, right?
Yep. Part of a bigger project on digital identity focused on opening bank accounts remotely. They wanted to see how well different digital wallets, browsers, and operating systems could work together with one system verifying the digital identity. They tested both the ISO standard for mobile driver's licenses and different configurations of OpenID for verifiable presentations. And a key aspect was enabling remote testing so more people could participate.
Smart move. So how did it go?
Well, the results from the April 4th test were pretty good. Overall success rate of around 87%. For the mobile driver's license profile, about 80 out of 89 test combinations passed. And for the SD-JWT testing, 27 out of 28 combinations were successful. Some known issues were already being addressed, and they've got more tests planned.
Sounds promising.
It is. They're also going to do a demo for stakeholders and a public webinar to share their findings.
Great. And lastly, just a quick update on the conformance and certification program. Sounds like they're making progress across the board.
Yeah, lots of progress on developing tests for various specs. FAPI, they've added DPPOG support, and the FAPI 2 tests should be in beta soon. OpenID Federation, they've got beta tests available, and they're developing tests for automatic registration. eKYC tests are being updated, and they're talking about a certification program for that. Shared signals, the transmitter tests are done, and they're starting on the receiver tests. And the verifiable presentations tests, those were used in the NIST testing, with VCI tests coming soon. They're also talking to the European Commission about potentially using these tests in their regulatory framework.
So keeping everyone on their toes, making sure implementations are up to snuff.
Exactly. It's all about ensuring interoperability, security, and trust.
Well, that was quite a journey. Thanks for guiding us through it all.
My pleasure. It's amazing to see how much is happening in this space. The OpenID Foundation and the whole community, they're really pushing the boundaries of digital identity.
It's evolving so rapidly. It makes you wonder what the future holds.
It does. And that's the question we leave you with. With all this standardization and interoperability work, what new possibilities might emerge? What can we build now that we couldn't build before? It's an exciting time to be involved in digital identity.
Definitely. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time.